Welcome to a special episode of the Voice of San Diego podcast. I'm Sara Libby.
And I'm Rivard.
You might remember us from a recent podcast where we explained all the state ballot measures on your ballot this November.
If you haven't checked that out, make sure you add that to your podcasting list. It's available on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, all those things.
So we're back today to introduce another discussion that we recently hosted at Politifest, and we talked to some lawmakers about some of the biggest issues facing the state of California.
Some of the most vocal lawmakers in the state. We talked to Assemblywoman Shirley Weber, Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez, Assemblyman Chad Mays, who's from out near Joshua Tree. We talked about police. We talked about teachers' unions. We talked about housing, wildfires, daycare, the whole gamut.
The whole gamut. All right, so here's the audio from that panel, and enjoy. All right, hi, I'm Sara Libby. I'm the managing editor at Voice of San Diego. I'm thrilled to learn that there are people here that care about issues other than a stadium. Good for you. Although if you're here by accident, the stadium debate is around the corner, so no hard feelings. So Rye and I report on state issues down here from this corner of California where it often feels like we don't matter very much. I think back to a big op-ed that Senator Dianne Feinstein wrote about a year ago on homelessness and her approach to it. And it talked a lot about the problems in Los Angeles and the problems in San Francisco, and San Diego did not appear once in anything that she wrote, even though we have a much bigger homeless population than one of those cities. Sacramento is where the decisions are made, and San Diego is maybe a nice place where you visit the beach on a weekend. We're about to get a new governor. The state is in a perpetual legal state of siege with the federal government over everything from net neutrality, gas mileage standards, law enforcement and immigration, and on and on. Schools are wildly unequal from district to district and from neighborhood to neighborhood. The cost of living has gotten so high that the percentage of our neighbors living in poverty is jarring and has provoked some pretty extreme responses like measures on rent control and the gas tax repeal. So that's sort of a bleak overview, of where we're at. And with that, I think we'll introduce our panelists. Thank you guys so much for being here with us. Ryan and I wrote these introductions ourselves. They were not handwritten by these lawmakers, so I hope that you don't get up and leave the panel.
Sarah's going to throw some shade.
Assemblyman Chad Mays represents parts of San Bernardino and Riverside counties. He lives out in Yucca Valley, which is a city or town right along the border with Joshua Tree National Park, beautiful area of the state. He's got a background in local government and financial planning. He's called himself a governing conservative, and earlier this year launched A New Way California with former Governor Schwarzenegger and an assist from Ohio Governor John Kasich, two nationally notable moderate Republicans.
All right. Assemblywoman Lorena Gonzalez represents portions of San Diego, National City, and Chula Vista in the legislature. She's chair of the powerful Appropriations Committee. She's written several bills that have gained national attention related to improving the lives of workers and women, and has been known to quote Eminem lyrics when making points about childcare affordability.
Assemblywoman Shirley Weber has taken on some of the most powerful interest groups in California as she's pursued policies to improve public schools, teachers' unions, and make law enforcement groups more accountable to the public law enforcement police unions. She's spoken up and down the state about the promise of the California dream and the power of education to transform people's lives.
Assemblywoman Gonzalez, I was struck by a conversation that we had recently where you mentioned that Governor Brown has not been focused enough on childcare affordability issues, and your hope is that with a new governor, there will be renewed attention on that. Are there any big priorities of yours that you're hoping will get more attention from a new governor? And we'll start with you, and then maybe can throw it to the others as well.
So childcare has been one, I think Shirley and I both know, or Dr. Weber and I both know from working in the Women's Caucus, has been our priority for years, and we keep putting it out there, billion-dollar asks, which really is a drop in the bucket of what we need in California. It's been difficult with this governor, as great as he's been on a lot of things. We're all colored by our own experience, and I think the fact that he never had children really weighed heavily on our discussions. I think there's a barrier of understanding between what people in our district face and maybe his own experience with getting kicked out of childcare at a young age. Not
Fun fact about Jerry Brown.
Fun fact about Jerry Brown, but when you're the son of the governor, life is a little different. And so we're hopeful that that'll change. We just got a series of bills vetoed by this governor that dealt with low-wage women workers in the Me Too movement, although he was willing to sign some that really help women who are in positions of power, which is necessary, and those were bills I supported and co-authored and jockeyed. He left on the table every bill that would have supported low-wage women in the private sector. And so I think we're hopeful that we can bring some of those bills back this year. And then my final hope is a bill that also got vetoed for the second time, and that's to change up the statute of limitations for childhood sexual assault. And so I think we had been hopeful that with the change in the news that maybe Governor Brown's position and perspective on what the church has done and the damage that it has caused and how many victims have been left out of the ability to pursue justice, that he might open his eyes to that, but he instead rewrote his veto message from 5 years ago. So we'll try that again next year. So those are just some of the issues protecting kids, in particular, children, working class women, and in the middle class. That's what I'm hoping we'll work on.
Dr. Weber, is there anything that you're hoping a new governor prioritizes a little more or takes a different approach to?
Well, surely I would hope, and I have no evidence that my hopes will be fulfilled, but and my hope, if we're going to deal with education and children, that we would at least have an agenda in California to change and to improve our schools. Our only agenda now is to give more money, but there is no accountability for what the money that we give. We saw that in our local control funding formula, and despite the fact that I had 3 bills that were passed out of the Assembly with probably 79 out of 80 votes, and at the Senate, sometimes 39 or 40 votes out of the 40, and get to the governor's desk, and he vetoes it. And the bill was basically talking about accountability and making sure that in our assessment and evaluation of our schools and our educators, that at some point, the success of the students, their performance, is a part of the evaluation of our staff and the quality of our schools. So I'm not sure where this governor stands. We've been battling these issues of accountability, performance, trying to strengthen our tenure process in terms of teachers, making sure that they have more time to get tenure, but also that if they're struggling and have difficulty, that they get the support that they need to become better teachers. And so making schools a priority, not just in terms of funding, but outcomes in terms of what we expect from our students, and making our kids competitive in terms of the national standards that are there. I'm not sure if this governor is there yet. I hope he is. I'm scheduled to have a meeting with him about that, but I don't plan to give up on it, because I think one of the 2 things we do in the state that we're supposed to do is educate our kids, and the other is to keep people safe, public safety. So I'm not sure where he is on all those issues. I know where I am. And I will continue to deal with this, and we will bring those issues back again to our House, and in hopes that, number one, we'll get the support of members, but also we'll get the support of the governor to make it a priority.
Assemblyman Mays, what's your relationship been like with this governor, and what are your hopes for a new one working as somebody who's, in a big minority in the legislature?
Well, let me answer that question a little bit, but I was just going to say, Dr. Weber, I can probably give you John Cox's phone number. So if you'd like to...
I have to say that my Republican colleagues have always been 100% on the issues of accountability and student performance, and excellent for students. And on my tenure bill as well.
Yeah, that was a joke. You're all supposed to laugh. And also just wanted to, before, just say thank you to the Voice of San Diego for hosting us and inviting me. I'm actually a bit honored to be here with these 2 fine individuals. It is no joke to say that this one right to the right of me is exceptionally powerful in Sacramento. She is the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, which means if you want to get anything done, you have to like kiss up to her. And so I'm trying to do that right now.
There you go.
But she's also incredibly talented. And then with Dr. Weber, I think there's not even a close second to somebody who is as articulate as she is. She gives speeches on the floor if you ever get a chance to be able to watch them. And there are no notes. There's nothing in front of her. It is just her brutal intellect that allows her to be able to speak in the way that she does. And we, both Democrats and Republicans, are often awe-inspired by her comments. So it's an honor to be able to be with both of them here. You know, it's interesting with the governor. I'm a Republican. I was the Republican leader for a couple of years. I'm no longer.
We'll get into that.
I'm no longer. But it's interesting. I actually have a really close relationship with Governor Brown. You know, for some time, he'd call me out of the blue almost every week. Chad, how's it going? How are you doing? What are you hearing? What's going on? Anytime I wanted to, this was after I was no longer a leader, if I wanted to go and schedule a meeting with them, he took my meeting. So I was able to spend quite a bit of time with him. It is going to be different. We don't know right now what it's going to be like when more than likely Gavin Newsom is going to be the next governor. We don't know what it's going to be like over the next 4 years. We don't know what kind of dynamic there's going to be. The relationship between the legislative leaders and the governor is going to be. And so we're all sort of guessing. And quite frankly, I'm not sure Gavin Newsom knows what it's going to be like. And so we're going to have to work those things out. I'll tell you, I'm going to miss Governor Brown. It was a pleasure to be able to work with him. We didn't see eye to eye on a lot of different issues, but he was somebody that was thoughtful, understood the political process, and his years of experience and knowledge helped sort of get us to where we needed to be. On the fiscal side, my goodness, he did a pretty fine job of being able to make sure that the budget is balanced. And if you take where the budget was when he first got elected to office to where it is today, the fact that we have not one, not two, but 3 different rainy day funds really has a lot to do with Governor Brown's leadership. So I'm going to miss him.
Yeah, we have these the ability to text in questions, and at our first session of the mayors, for those of you who were there, I was checking online the texted questions that had come in, and one of them was, how close is California to going bankrupt? And I thought, not very, not very. So I want to jump into some of the big issues that you've all been involved with over the last couple of years. And we'll start with Dr. Weber. Your bill that would have changed the standards for when police can deploy deadly force got a lot of attention, but ultimately didn't make it through the legislature this year. Can you talk a little bit about just what was involved with shepherding that bill through? And, you know, there were really intense emotions on both sides of the issue. This was the first time I've ever, I think, heard radio ads for a bill in the legislature from the police unions advocating against it. So what exactly happened with the decisions first to change it and then to ultimately shelve it for the time being?
Well, it became apparent after a period of time. For the last 5 or 6 years, we've been dealing with the whole issue of police interaction and the shooting of unarmed individuals in the African American and Latino community. And of course, this is nothing new, but the fact that now you have people with cameras and phones and they can make videos. So the reality is that has existed in our communities for many, many years. And in fact, if you look at the history of the unrest in community, whether it's the Rots Revolt or whatever, most of it revolved around an unnecessary stop by a police officer and the things that occurred afterwards. So as we looked at the Trayvon Martin situation, where the young man was in his grandmother's backyard and without people actually seeing him and just stepping out and shooting him because they thought he had vandalized some cars or whatever the deal was. You know, this man is shot several times in the back and killed in his grandmother's backyard, and he had only in his hand his cell phone. And we've seen that many times happen. So it became apparent to me that the community is upset because the community didn't understand why these occurred and nothing happened to the officers. A lot of it had to do with the standards by which people operate, and their operating standard was if you feel fear and if it's a reasonable fear, then you can basically shoot people. And so we said, we changed the standard and said, well, because we've seen what had happened in Seattle and we saw what was happening in San Francisco as they began to change the standards. The standards became not is it reasonable, but is it necessary? You know, are you in danger and in terms of losing your life or someone in the immediate community in danger? And if not, then you should not go to lethal force, whether it's a gun or whether it's a chokehold. You know, if someone's running away from you, should you shoot them in the back if you know where they live and have an opportunity to do something else? So it was a simple bill, we thought, that do that. But we knew it would be changing the issue of policing in California. And so as a result, we took that bill on, and it basically, as you know, got the firestorm in terms of police officers spending enormous amounts of money on ads and lobbyists and just a host of things, bringing in all kinds of visible things that they could see, whether it was the trucks that had the pictures of every officer who'd been killed in California in the last 200 years, and on and on and on. But California has the highest death rate, has the highest number of deaths of any of police shootings in the nation, and it had and half of those were basically folks who were unarmed, and most of them were black and brown. And so this was an issue that there had been no discussion about before in terms of actually resolutions for issues. So we proposed this with a serious number of supporters, community organizations, agencies, ACLU, legal groups, some district attorneys, you name it, supporting this. And the only folks opposed to it basically were the police officers throughout the state of California. It would have dramatically changed policing in California in terms of the expectation as well as the training. We had put into the budget money to train, to talk about de-escalation and to retrain our officers. We'd heard from persons who were in the military who called us and said, if we shot unarmed civilians, we would be court-martialed, because we were taught to deal with our fear, not by shooting people, but basically dealing with the issue and trying to de-escalate. And if a soldier shoots an unarmed civilian, even in war zones, they would be court-martialed. Okay, so we took this on, knowing that it would be a big battle, and it was supposed to go to the Senate first. We had lots of discussions. Members were very afraid because they had been basically, you know, police officer unions have tremendous ability to influence people's thinking, basically can run campaigns against individuals, so forth and so on. And, you know, I'm a little crazy because I didn't really care if they did run a campaign against me. It really wouldn't have mattered because my life is pretty complex and difficult and perfect without being in the assembly. So it really is. I've done 40 years at university. I should be done by now. But anyway, so as a result, we took the bill on, and people were very concerned. Black and brown folks were very concerned of what it would mean for them in their reelection. The communities were very adamant about it, and we had gotten to a point where in the process, the Speaker, President Pro Tem, Toni Atkins, intervened and took the bill under her control. So that's how it got out of appropriations into the control of in the Senate, President Pro Tem. And so as a result, she agreed to hold the bill. We were going to see if we had the votes with all the different entities, and we didn't have probably the votes at the time. She was concerned that it would not look good if the bill didn't pass. So we've agreed to take the bill. It will be reintroduced in December. It has the support of the President Pro Tem of the Senate. So she has told them that something will happen in California to change policing in California. So we're optimistic that this bill will move forward, that with the support of the President Pro Tem and a number of others who are adamant about the bill, that the bill will go forward. She's asked the police officers to work with us on this matter because they refused to work in the first instance. They offered no recommendations for change, no amendments, nothing. They just wanted to kill the bill. So she said to them, you may kill it this time, but you will not kill it forever. And so we're excited about the fact of that. We have committees that are already working, and that bill will come back. It's currently number 931, but will be another number when we will introduce it either in December or January. My staff is working on it now because I'm committed to the fact that we must value life in California and that lethal force should only be used when it is absolutely necessary.
Assemblyman Mays, let's talk about you. You alluded to it. You were the Republican leader, but then you broke ranks with your party, voted for Governor Brown's cap and trade legislation. Can you sort of explain that vote? why you voted with all the Democrats on it, and why it cost you your gig, and would you do it again?
Well, I could take up the entirety of the rest of our time here, but I will not do. I will not do that. I'll actually tell you that's one of the things that I am. That deal, maybe 398 cap and trade, is the thing I'm most proud about. In fact, even during the time when people said, this could cost your leadership, I said I don't care. I didn't believe at the time that it would, but I was like, I don't care. They said, you might not get reelected, and I said, I don't care. And it's interesting, actually, just if I can for a second, with Dr. Weber talking about this, that there are elected officials, both at the state level and back in Washington, D.C., that all they care about is getting reelected.
Exactly.
For God's sake, that's not why you get elected. Now, for me, in regards to cap and trade, I want to be fair. My guess is, just by looking at some of you and the way you've applauded so far, and with the fact that we're on a university campus, that there's probably not a lot of Republicans in the room. That would be my guess. So it's also important to note I voted no on the cap. That was what happened with SB 32 in 2016, but I voted yes on the trade. We had to reduce our greenhouse gas. SB 32 said we're going to take our greenhouse gas emissions below 40% below 1990 levels by 2030. There was no way in the world that we were going to I was going to get that law changed, even if we get to 20%, because the legislature, and by the way, Californians, that's the other part of this, it's really important. Californians believe that climate change is real. The legislature believes that climate change is real. So as a matter of public policy and public opinion, that issue is settled, and it is greenhouse gases that have gotten us there. So if the goal is to get to 40% below 1990 levels, what's the best way to get there? Well, guys, I'm a Republican. I believe in free markets. I believe that transactions between rational individuals are going to get us there. And so cap and trade was the way to be able to get us there. It was either that or what we're calling command and control, giving the California Air Resources Board the authority to be able to do whatever it takes to be able to get there. Now, as a Republican and somebody who calls himself a governing conservative, that scares the heck out of me. And so for me, it was very simple. I said, if our choice is A or B, I want to be able to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to that 40% below 1990 levels. I actually want to get to the goal of 80% by 2050. We need to be able to do that, but I want the market to be able to exercise to be able to make that happen. So AB 398, here's the kicker for me. It actually began because I promised the governor in December the year before that I would take the time to be able to dig in, and I actually did that. So then I got to a point where after I had the knowledge, I had to deal with the issue of my conscience. Because now that I had the knowledge, I knew what was right. I had no choice in the matter but to go down that road. We did have, I want to say this, we did have 15 members of the Assembly Republican Caucus out of 25 initially that were supportive. It got down to 12. We went down to 12 inside the governor's office. And over the course of a week, because of all the pressure that came in from the outside, it ended up only being 7 in the Assembly. And then Tom Berryhill over in the Senate ended up being number 8. But that's because of the political pressure, not because they didn't know that it was the right thing to do. So quickly, while I lost my leadership, it took 4 or 5 weeks. The caucus actually supported. We had a vote. The Friday, the Monday was the vote on cap and trade. Thursday we caucused. I had more than enough votes to be able to continue as leader. But this is the problem with social media and other avenues, is that it went from a 1,000-acre wildfire of misinformation to 500,000 uncontained. And the amount of misinformation that had gotten out there amongst the activists, they were putting so much pressure on the other members that, if you don't vote to kick Chad out, then we're not going to endorse you for re-election. And the number one job of being a leader is to protect your members. And I got to the point where I could no longer protect my members. So my choice is to continue to keep fighting against that, or to be able to step down. And for me, the choice was quite simple. So that's the quick story.
That was pretty quick. Good job. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. You've passed some very big and high-profile bills during your time in Sacramento, but arguably your most high-profile bill this session, which would have stopped employers from requiring new employees to sign arbitration contracts, was vetoed by the governor, along with several other sexual harassment measures, as you mentioned. So were you surprised by these vetoes? And can you talk a little bit about whether you had any conversations with the governor and what those were like, and just sort of how the whole thing played out?
I was surprised. So you get to a certain point of understanding or thinking you understand this governor, and there's give and take. And the governor tends to call certain people and ask certain things of them, either the governor or his staff, over and over again, as Chad knows. And when they openly will say you deliver, you often think it's a reciprocal arrangement, right? So, he told me very to my face, these are my priorities, some of which I understood. And we had for example, it's my kind of tangential Me Too bill, but we had a discussion about childhood victims because of some of his public safety, criminal justice reform bills he wanted. And I said, well, I have my priorities too, and it has to do with victims. And so I do have to say, despite that conversation, I thought there would be an open mind to looking at some of things that are really tough to do. So my childhood sexual assault bill devastated me. I had zero idea. I thought for sure, given my interaction with both the governor and his staff, that they were actually going to look at it with fresh eyes, that they were going to give it a shot. This is a special circumstance we're in front of. So it's not usually the things I work on. It's a very emotional bill for me. I'm Catholic. I understood I was taking on my own church. But it was something that I think needs to be done in California. And I had broad bipartisan support. And so that was shocking. Now, on the Me Too bills and the bills that we did, we had some initial discussions. I had discussions with his staff on all of them and with him on a few of them. They held them off to the end because they were controversial bills. But I was surprised. I think it's clear the governor no longer needs me. So I got what I've never had before is a litany of all my priority bills vetoed. Usually I can squeeze one or two. I did get my voting bill through, but it's unfortunate because what it is, and this is my criticism of this governor, or any governor, quite frankly. The Chamber of Commerce holds so much sway in the Capitol. And to the point where we do a lot in California, and we've made a lot of progress. We've done a ton for public employees, and that's good. I came from the labor movement. I will defend everything we should do for public employees. I think that's important. But we do that because if you're in Sacramento, who's fighting against those benefits? Maybe some Republicans, but not like a moneyed interest, right? We do a lot for our social safety net, as we should. We've increased welfare payments, or we've done, bits and pieces. Holly Mitchell has done a wonderful job on ensuring that the poorest among us are taken care of. We have expanded social safety nets, and that's pretty easy. My Republican colleague even had a CalWorks bill. We have bipartisan support for that, and nobody fights it because there's no moneyed interest. But when it comes to the working poor, when it comes to rank and file workers who in the district I represent, which is the southernmost district in San Diego to the border, the people who I represent, they're filling our hotels, working for the tourism industry, our restaurants. They're the ones who bus your tables, who serve you. They're the folks who clean up after you, the janitors. We have a litany of service workers and middle-class workers, teachers, public school and private school. We have a number of people who work on the working waterfront, really hardworking folks who continue to live in poverty. And that's because the people who fight the changes for these workers are moneyed interest. And what I find unfortunate, and the thing that I don't understand and I hope to change, is how we can start to look at the only way that we're actually going to tackle poverty in California is to recognize that the majority of the people who are poor are working. They're working. And every time we don't demand more from companies, we're basically subsidizing it. I'm very proud of some of the votes I've taken and some of the things I've been able to do. But I'll tell you this, one of the things we're proudest of on probably both sides, definitely the Democratic side, is the earned income tax credit. It's great. It's very popular. If people work hard, they can actually get in fact, more than they pay in taxes back. It's a great program, and I'm proud of it. but I'm also very realistic. What we're doing is we're subsidizing bad employers. Because what we're doing is saying, it's okay, Walmart, that your workers are on food stamps, or they qualify for Section 8 housing, or they have the EITC, which we taxpayers are paying for. We're going to subsidize that and allow your executives and your stock to just completely explode. There is nobody, I would guess, in this room that is worried that CEO pay has not gone up enough. I mean, if somebody is, please tell me. Who here thinks that the real problem in California is we don't pay our executives enough, right? And yet, every time we have a bill to increase the wages, to ensure that there's protections for independent contractors, average working people, we get this question as if we're going to ruin the economy. At the same time as we're saying we have the best economy in I don't know what history, the same people who are applauding Donald Trump's version of this economy says we can't do anything for the average worker. That's what's wrong in California. And if we don't start addressing the working poor and the issues surrounding and getting more money into the pockets of working poor, then we will actually create a state that will eventually implode.
I just want to throw that open to the other two. Were there any last-minute surprises at the end of the session as far as what the governor did and vetoed?
You know, I guess I was, and I can't remember the number. I think it's 1231, the bill. I was very surprised that we did not get merit step increases for the lowest working people in our universities. The merit step increases where you apply for it if money's available and if you demonstrate it that you've actually done meritorious work, you get an increase in you get a 5% step. And that was taken away in the 90s during a situation, and yet every group has gotten it back, has been able to get that merit increase back, except for the lowest paid individuals at the university. And we had lobbied, and we had gotten good support from Democrats and Republicans on committees. We had really gotten that bill to the governor's desk, and I had said several times, if you have a problem, give me a call, because they had talked about collective bargaining, and we're all in favor of collective bargaining. But the bottom line was they could not get their merit back, and it was taken away from them when there was without collective bargaining. In other words, we had collective bargaining in place, and the administration still took it without collective bargaining. So to give it back to them would be important. And the governor's message was, well, this is something that should be done through collective bargaining. Well, it should have been taken away through collective bargaining, but it was not. So this was an unfair takeaway, and it's been there for years, and it's demoralizing to the lowest paid individuals at the university. And so not to give it back to them, totally unacceptable. And then the message to say, well, I'm pressuring, I don't know who wrote the message. And Jerry and I get along really well. We fight a lot. And he loves that, but you know, the fact that you write a message that you're going to tell the universities that they need to deal with this, and you're on your way out the door, you have no more power over the universities anymore. Now, you could have said this 4 or 5 years ago, and naturally, when they're debating and negotiating salary or benefits from us, increase in budget, you might have some way to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to approve this increase in your budget because you're not treating these folks right. You might have some leverage. You have none now. You know, you got, what, a month and a half or whatever to go, a couple of months to go, and it's all over. You have no more leverage. So for you to say, I'm telling the university that this is really important and they should negotiate this, I'm like, when? Who? What? Why? Are you insane? Don't you know your time is up? So anyway.
Wait, I can one-up you on that. He directed his administration to come back to me with something in 2020.
See, that's what I'm saying. So I don't know what he was thinking about in the final moments of vetoing that bill. But that was the bill that hurt me the most, because I'd been at the university when those merit salaries were taken away. I was a faculty member there. And I know that even in the faculty ranks, we had people coming in who were coming in, negotiating different salaries. And so we had an inversion. We had folks with a lot less experience and a lot less research who were making more than people who'd been there. And that was unfair. And many of our low-wage folks are talking now about the fact that they're doing their job and they're standing right next to someone who's doing the same custodial job or the same gardening job. And that person makes more than they make. And there's no way that they can get any merit adjustment. to their salary for the work that they've done. Now, everybody gets a raise. If there's money, they get 2%. Everybody gets that. But the merit raise is really based on your merit and working hard and applying for it. And it had been written that it only applied if there was actually money in the budget for it. You know, it was going to be evaluated in so many years to make sure it wasn't something out of, but the governor has a tendency to always side with the universities. And that's unfortunate. And so for me, that was a heartbreak because I knew the people that I was representing and I knew what they needed and I know how they had been demoralized and through the hearings and all those things. And so that was, for me, of all the things I did that were really high profile, racial profiling and police and this and gang lists, that was important to me because that really was about the working poor in our system and being fair and just with those individuals. And we had spent a lot of time working with them. And I was disappointed when it was vetoed. Immensely, I made sure that the governor's office knew that I was very disappointed. And if there was ever a veto, that would be the one that I would vote for. And I am still in conversation about that, or an override of a veto. But definitely committed to bringing it back because they deserve to be treated like everybody else.
So the question was, were there any surprises? There hadn't been because I'm never surprised. I mean, there's oftentimes Republican bills. Actually, if they get through, there's a good chance that they're going to end up getting signed, because if you're at 25 seats in the Assembly, it's got to be bipartisan. And if it gets out of the Senate too, then it's got to be bipartisan. So all of my bills at the end ended up getting signed. So I was very thankful for that. And then really, it's just amazing to me, really, you'd think, oh, well, if it went through, if it's a Democratic bill, it's going to get signed. Well, no, it doesn't. And the governor would act in a very independent way. So really, there wasn't anything surprising. I don't know if we're going to get to this, but I actually want to talk a little bit about, well, Lorena, if I can. It's interesting, sort of the lens that you see, that you come from. For me, and the reason why I think Speaker Rendon and I became very, very close was, yes, I'm a Republican, by the way. I'm a tall white guy, blonde hair, blue eyes. I think I'm the whitest guy in the legislature other than Tom Daley. I think Tom. But I grew up in a town in the Mojave Desert called Yucca Valley. It is a disadvantaged community, and it is full of folks who are struggling to make ends meet. And when I first moved back to Yucca Valley and decided to live there, which I initially said I would never do, I got elected at a very young age to the town council, to the city council. And my thought was, how can we make people's lives better here? What can we do to make their lives better? What can we do to increase their quality of life? What can we do to increase their educational opportunities? What can we do to be able to increase their the capacity for them to be able to make a better income so they can provide for their families? And so that was the lens that I came from. Now, I'm to the right side of the spectrum, and I do believe in freedom and free markets, and I know that that's always a battle, but the end is the goal. The struggle we have here in this state is, yes, we are the 5th largest economy in the world, but I haven't given a speech in the last 4 years without referencing the fact that we have the highest poverty rate in the nation. Right. That is a matter of fact. So use the census, the supplemental poverty measure. We have the highest poverty rate in the nation. Folks are struggling here in this state. So we've got some folks that live up in the Silicon Valley, and they are paper billionaires. Good for them. California's a great place. We're thankful for the amount of revenue you come in to be able to provide for state assistance. But the folks that live in Lorena's district, many folks that live in my district, folks that live up the Central Valley and up in the North State, up in Brian Dowley's district, are struggling in this state to try to make ends meet. And that, to me, I think is the question that we have to come to address over the course of the next 4 years, and forget about our partisanship and just put on the fact that we are elected officials with the goal, the charge of trying to make people's lives better. That should be our focus.
So one of the big issues is obviously the housing shortage, and the legislature dealt with these 2 disparate issues last year that I thought were really interesting. In cities, there's a lot of opposition to any sort of new density. There's the NIMBY opposition, but there is some incentives, particularly in San Diego. Developers are putting up homes all across the rural areas, what we call the backcountry, and then they're fire prone. And the legislature was also dealing with the wildfire liabilities. is there a point at which the state is going to need to step in and sort of sort out local control, because the local governments are just not doing it? They're not allowing higher density, and then they're also putting people at risk.
I'll go first on this one. Yes, I think maybe that's probably, and that's coming from somebody that believes that government is best, that which governs closest to the people. I served for 8 years on the Yucca Valley Council, and I wanted the ability to be able to decide for land use in our community. Yucca Valley is 2/3 Republican, 1/3 Democrat. But in regards to any sort of building that we had in that town came from, if I went to a Republican women's group, it was the Republican women that were opposed to any new development, because they didn't want to see that density, because they thought that it would change the dynamic and whatever. I don't want to get into that, but would begin to change what Yucca Valley was. Whether you're in San Francisco,
Community character.
yes. If you are in San Francisco, and we've had lots of conversations with the senator that represents San Francisco, and if you're in San Francisco, I think there's 9% Republicans in that city. It's the same problem there. It's incredibly difficult to be able to build. There are basic laws of economics, and the reason why the housing prices are going up is because we do not have enough supply and we have too much demand. And the problem, and we can blame CEQA, we can blame it, but there are a bunch of city council members and planning commissioners that feel incredible amounts of pressure, county supervisors, incredible amounts of pressure to not approve housing. And until we start building more housing, and when you're in an urban core, you got to build dense housing. There's no other way. And if you build it out into the backcountry, then you got problems with people driving into where the jobs are going to be, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's a serious problem all over this state. And unfortunately, I think we have to get to a point to where the state's going to have to say, for the sake of the future of this state, we're going to have to start to work with the League of Cities. We're going to have to work with CSAC and say, let's come up with a plan of how we can start to build some housing, some workforce housing, because also the problem is that the housing that is being built is in the $450, $550, $750, $850, $2-3 million range, and we need houses that are going to be built in the $200, $250, $300,000 range. And until we start doing that, we're not going to solve the problem.
Yeah. I think we agree completely on this. There was an interesting bill, kind of went under the radar this year. It was a bill out of Northern California that David Chu and Tim Grayson collaborated on, basically with their BART stations, basically BART-owned land, allowing for high density housing, and kind of, I think it prevents the locals from stopping it because it's obviously near transit. It was very limited. It was more limited than the Wiener bill, but similar to the Wiener bill, but limited to those areas that BART actually owned. And immediately, of course, some of us think, like, that's a good idea. I happen to represent a district that I won't say the whole district's like this, because we have some West Chula Vistans that don't want to block views. But for the most part, that welcome high-density housing. They live in high-density housing. They want more housing. And so it is frustrating, I think, to see all these cities forego their responsibility to create these opportunities. I think we have to do better at the state. I prefer it not be at the state, but it's clear that that's the only way it's going to happen. I don't think the answer is building our backcountry. We just saw how much money we're going to have to spend to continue to defend basically people's houses who have been built in places that should have never been built. I'm sorry, that's the truth. And we all, as ratepayers really, are going to be paying for that for a long time. And it's nice that people can have a big yard and a big house, and I know that's some people's view of the American dream, but we're going to have to retool how we think of the California dream, because we do need high-density housing in urban areas that may not be a house, and that's okay, because it's a lot better than what my community is living in. That's 2 to 3 families to a 2-bedroom apartment. That's unacceptable, and we all bear responsibility for that. And I think the state is going to have to come in and do some creative things like the Chu Grayson bill. I can't remember the number of it, but it was very controversial and then got signed. And I was just kind of surprised we didn't put a lot of attention on it. Could be done with MTS down here. Just a little idea for anyone running for county board of supervisors.
If only you knew one.
Wonder who.
He's so sick of me giving him ideas, I'll tell you. I got a list. He's going to give me the Jerry Brown treatment pretty soon. No more. But I think that that's an important feature we have to become terms with. There's another thing that we kind of talked a little bit about, and I think Voice has a little bit, but not really, and it's really disturbing, and we have to get to the bottom of this. There are a number of units that were built downtown. We all sat and watched high rises, and it was so great from my perspective, all those jobs, those construction jobs, those union construction jobs, all downtown. And then you go downtown and most of the lights are off at night. We have what we can't even identify as a vacancy rate because basically it was sold to Chinese investors. And a lot of those units are being held as investment properties from what I understand, mainly Chinese investors, and we have to figure out and have the political will to say maybe we implement a vacancy tax. Maybe we say if you're not willing to live in it and you're taking stock from San Diego or other areas, of course that would have to be a local thing. And San Diego loves taxes. No matter what, no matter who we're taxing, right? They're going to say no, but it's something we should look at because it's not that things haven't been built in San Diego. And when those units were built, we have to remember this, a bunch of SROs came down, a bunch of low-income housing stock came down. It was never replaced. They told us it's okay because the market will work this way. Folks will move up. Well, nobody's living in that moved up kind of area. So that's something we needed to work with, but that's more of a local approach.
Yeah, if I can, just to talk about, I've got folks that live in my district, so I represent Hemet San Jacinto. I've got folks that live in my district that work downtown San Diego.
Oh my God.
And so, when you think about that, if we're going to build more housing, because they want to be able to have a yard, but they're driving on those freeways and they're commuting 80 miles, 90 miles, 100 miles every single day. And you think about, is that the kind of quality life that we want in California? So that you can leave at 5 o'clock in the morning and not be able to provide breakfast for your kids. Oh, and then when you come home at night, you got maybe an hour with them so you can put them to bed. You get to see them on the weekends. I don't think that that's the sort of quality of life that we're talking about. So we've got to fix the problem.
Dr. Weber, if you were suddenly made the all-powerful leader of the state,
Which is pretty
After that,
Yeah, right.
she'd sign all my bills.
what would you do to make sure all kids had access to the highest quality education possible?
Oh my God. Oh my God. Somebody's got a pencil. They're writing all this stuff down. Well, I think, first and foremost, with regards to it, we have to make sure that every classroom has a teacher prepared to teach. And unfortunately, we've gotten caught up in a lot of the rules and regulations that don't allow our administrators to do that, even though they have the ability to do it by law, to place teachers in places where they know they're needed, where our greatest need is. We don't do that. And so what we find in our schools is that we find folks with good hearts working very hard, but schools with a tremendous number of inexperienced teachers who have kids who have great needs. That becomes extremely important because the success of our students will be based on the quality of the teacher that's in the classroom. And I say that as a university professor and as a person who's worked with schools forever, that when you get, and most parents know that, when you get a high quality instructor in a classroom, you're going to get good results. And because we don't do that, we find that when I was on the school board, I had schools that had 60 and 70% new teachers, And as a result, and as soon as the teachers got to the point where they had experience and what have you, they would basically opt out to go somewhere else. And so therefore schools north of 8 had almost had like one new teacher. And schools south of 8 had almost 2/3 of their staff was first and second year teachers, which killed the principal who was doing all the assessment evaluation. There were no role models for those teachers to help them to mentor their peers that were there. And kids basically were suffering because they were getting the inexperienced folks experimenting on them. Okay, so we truly have to change that model. And there's been some discussion and lawsuits that have passed, the Williams lawsuit and others, that really demanded that we have that we have high quality instruction. We once tried to do a bill that said that no school should have greater than its percentage of new teachers, so that if 5% of new teachers were in the district, you can have more than 5% new teachers at your school. unless there was something special, a waiver because of expertise or something of that nature. So fundamentally beginning that the classroom has to have and the school has to have a significant number of high quality teachers who know how to teach children with special needs, but who also have the experience of classroom instruction and management at the same time. So you find that you go into our schools, you have great individuals with good heart, but they're new teachers and they're learning. So that's number one. We also have to begin to talk about the assessment of our teachers. We don't assess teachers in California other than once. And a teacher becomes tenured in 18 months after teaching. And as a result, there's very little assessment that occurs afterwards. So we need an assessment system. And I know that Escondido was trying one where we go in periodically, not to be punitive, but to assess them. Even as a faculty member at San Diego State, I had the responsibility of evaluating my faculty. And I had to do it ever so often. Even those who were full professors, I had to evaluate full professors and make recommendations for change that they needed to make to improve their teaching or to improve their research or whatever it may be. But we don't do that often enough, and we don't do enough assessment. I serve as the vice chair of the Education Commission of the states representing California, and other states have much more robust assessment and evaluation of their teachers and more support for those teachers who are struggling. We lose a lot of teachers in California, not mainly because they don't have the support to be better. And they become frustrated because they went into teaching because they want to make a difference. And yet there is no ongoing assessment, no ongoing evaluation, not helping them by getting them the staff development that they need. And when you basically make those issues in Sacramento as key issues that would improve the system, you get everybody in the world screaming and hollering that you want to fire people, that you want to get rid of them, when you're really trying to improve the quality of instruction. So the number one thing we can talk about a lot of things we do, whether we're going to give them computers or this or that and all that stuff, and that's all nice. And we've done all of that in California and discovered that when the rubber meets the road, it is the relationship between that teacher and that student, and the ability of that teacher to inspire those students, to give them the curriculum they need. Even if you have lower class size, we've discovered that doesn't work in San Diego. It helps when you've got a very effective teacher. If you've got a class size of 19 and 20 kids, it helps, no question. But if you have 19, 20 kids in a classroom and you don't have an experienced teacher who knows what they're doing, and you don't have the support that's coming in as mentor teachers to help them, it is not going to work. Okay? So the bottom line is that the relationship between the teacher and the students makes a world of difference. It motivates students, it changes it, and we have to focus on the K through 3 years because those are the critical years. Really, we have to focus on 18 months to the third grade. Those are the critical years of intellectual development. Those are the critical years where kids will basically learn to love learning, and they will get the skills necessary to improve their learning from that point forward. So we have 8 years, I tell folks, in the life of a child, from the time they're born till they're 8 years old, to really determine the future of a child. We should focus on that. We should make sure that we do everything we can in preschool and childcare, and when they get to school, that we have the best teachers teaching our kids and that we are giving them the best support possible. If that happens, you can build new schools. You can put, all kinds of magic boards behind them. You can have, which they do, and you can do everybody can take home an iPad and da-da-da-da-da. You can do all that stuff, but the bottom line is it is a relationship between the teacher and the student. It is a human experience. Education is. And without that, you are just, as they would say, blowing in the wind. Comes right back on you, and you will not make that much progress.
Thank you.
That's good. He's right.
I have a related question. So for the past year or so, Voice of San Diego has been reporting on sexual harassment and misconduct in public schools by public school employees. And what we found is that it can be often so hard to fire a teacher even after an investigation has taken place that has substantiated accusations by one student, by 10 students, that it's sometimes so hard and cumbersome and costly to fire a teacher that schools end up cutting these deals in which they agree to maybe pay them tens of thousands of dollars. They agree to never tell a future employer about their behavior. Do you think there's an appetite at the state level to examine some of these issues, or is it, just an untouchable thing that teachers have these protections?
Well, one of my former members, Buchanan, who was chair of the Education Committee, spent 2 years trying to write as a result of what happened in Los Angeles and the sexual assault abuse upon the generations of children from some teachers, from particularly one teacher, and they didn't get rid of this person who there's no telling how many kids' lives have been ruined as a result of this one person. And she spent 2 years, and she's good friend of all the labor groups and everything else in terms of education. And she could not get a strong evaluation bill that dealt with accountability for the performance of teachers with regards to that particular issue. It is a difficult thing to do because it's blocked and people see it. And so I don't even think it got out of her committee because she was chair, but she never could get it beyond her committee to even get it to the floor for evaluation. The other senator, I'm blocking on her name, Senator Liu in the Senate also had a similar bill before I got there to deal with the assessment of teachers and those kinds of things. And she could not get agreement from the labor groups on the language that was to be used as is there. So having been on the school board for 8 years, we saw things that would blow your mind. And felt handicapped in a lot of ways in terms of the fighting that occurred, the lawsuits, the expense of lawsuits. We fought them. And in the end, we had things sometimes overturned. I had a situation where a young man choked a kid unconscious in a classroom. He didn't like what a kid said, and he started the taunting, and the student responded. And as a result, up at Bell Junior High, this teacher got up and choked this kid unconscious. Okay? My position was fire him, okay? And we did. And we were made to put him back in the classroom. Okay, by the courts, because we fired him. We just said, this is unacceptable. This man is dangerous. And so they put him back in the classroom. And I had a fit, but I made sure that he would never teach in District E, which was my district. I said, so let the folks who have the time and the affluence and the money kill him up in La Jolla somewhere. So, which I think they pretty much did. Got rid of him. But, I knew in poor communities where parents don't come to school often enough, they wouldn't know what was going on with this man. But he choked this kid unconscious in the classroom in front of other kids. And to me, that was really the beginning when I first got in school, but that was the beginning of like, where the hell am I? What is this? I mean, what kind of situation is this? What will allow this to happen? And then I discovered we had teachers folks who had sexually assaulted somebody at Grossmont who came to our district, and we hired them because in order to get rid of them, they wouldn't put it in their record that this person had done some stuff in Grossmont, and he agreed to leave. So he ended up with us. And when we investigated some stuff he did in our district, we discovered he had been hired somewhere else. And the deal was if he left, that they would not write him up. Therefore, they didn't have to deal with a lawsuit and so forth and so on. So it is, I'm not sure if there's I think there's an appetite for it. In other words, it's something that should be done. I'm not sure if most folks are willing to fight as hard. Because I can tell you, when you take on, and I know, when you take on teachers unions and when you take on the police, you are in for a battle. And it is a battle that most of you seldom realize how complicated it is. And everybody is not willing to take on that battle. If it gets to the floor, they may be willing to vote for it, but then they might be pressured not to. But if you take on the issue, Lorena knows, I know, when you take on these hard issues, it is a battle. It is not something that is lightly done. You have to think hard about it, and you have to make sure that you are willing to fight the battle. Okay, and fortunately, there are a number of organizations and public groups that I've been fortunate to have as support groups that help you fight that battle. But it's not something you can probably do by yourself without a long list of supporters who are willing to lobby, to fight, and to help you through the process. But it's no question that it should be done. It is disgraceful that we would ever let people stay in our classrooms working with our children who have flaws like that in their lives, who are basically criminals and should not be in the classroom dealing with our children. And I think as a parent, as a citizen, and generally when it happens, people are outraged when they discover how long folks have been in that system, where they've been, and how they've been allowed to function with what we consider to be our most valuable asset, our children.
Yeah. I will say, our bill that did get vetoed, that a lot of people always consider the Catholic Church bill, was the first time it also included the schools and school districts. And in particular, there were a possibility of treble damages for a cover-up. And this is really important because that was really a lot of people didn't like that. And I kept getting the question, well, what's going to happen to some of these school districts? They might go under. Well, if a school district goes under because the number of times they've covered up childhood sexual abuse, we have bigger problems than the money aspect of this. And so I think one of the reason I had that in my bill and one of our approaches is we can blame it on the teachers union. And, I don't tend to do that. But it's also an excuse of the school districts and those people in power who said, we just can't fire these folks. It's just too hard. Now, sometimes they'll try, and sometimes there are things that need to be fixed. But until our school boards and our school districts and our superintendents understand that the number one priority in that school is the safety of those children and are willing to stand up. And I still believe that a financial incentive, knowing that you could get sued for hiding, especially serial sexual abusers or anyone who hurts a child, is motivation to figure out how you're going to work with your union in a collective bargaining agreement to make sure that doesn't happen. That would be in the financial interest of the union. It would be in the financial interest of the district. And so I think sometimes you have to put other pressures on to ensure that it could be fixed locally, because that could be fixed in a collective bargaining agreement. And the fact that it's not is because there's not the will of both parties. When both parties want something fixed, when they know that it's going to cost them, it will be fixed.
I just wanted to add to Dr. Weber's comments. In fact, like I said, she's brilliant. But what she was talking about has 80 to 85% support in California. So I saw everybody's head as she was talking. Everybody's doing this. I would suggest to you, if you had conversations with the legislature, out of the 120 members, you probably got 80, 85% support from the legislature. And yet, we still can't get some of this stuff done. And that is one of those things that is so incredibly frustrating. Is the way that some groups have a stranglehold. And even though people want to be able to get there, they go, no, I know it's the right thing to do. I know it's the right thing to do, but I can't. Because don't you know, I want to run for Senate someday. Or don't you know, I want to run for Congress someday. Or don't you know that I want to do something else. And it has a stranglehold. Until elected officials get to the point where they don't care about their political futures, some of this stuff will not get done. That's a fact.
Well, I thought you guys might talk right up until the end, and I was right. So I just want to thank so much our panelists